Do you want some impressive aim in Marvel Rivals? Then you're going to need to follow these 12 aiming tips and tricks. We have gameplay advice, settings, aim training, and much more. Oh, and all these tricks will work for both mouse and keyboard and on controller. Tip 1 is to learn where to look while aiming. Specifically, whether you should be focused on your crosshair or your enemy. This is a little more complicated than you might think, as there's no one set answer for this, and it really changes depending on the situation you'll find yourself in. My general rule is anytime you have a close-up target or a really fast moving target, then you want to be looking at the enemy while you're aiming. And this is going to make it a million times easier to keep up with their movement. So I'll try to prove this to you. So I want you to stare at my crosshair while taking a mental note of whenever you would fire your weapon. Every single time you think you would fire your weapon, just take a mental note of that. And you probably find it feels very difficult to get the shot timing down when your eyes are focused on that crosshair. Now, instead of focusing on that crosshair, I want you to focus on the enemy. And every time they're in the center of your screen, take a mental note of when you would fire a weapon. And you probably notice right away that this is a lot easier. But that doesn't mean you should never focus on your crosshair. In long range engagements, especially with single fire weapons like Black Widow's sniper rifle or even Hawkeye at times, you want to be focusing your crosshair to line up your shot. And you'll also notice in those long range engagements that the changes in enemy movement, so them strafing to the left and right, it won't be as drastic on your screen. So if you're focusing on the center, you're focusing on that crosshair, it should still keep the enemies focused in your eyes as well. And then you have to learn about tip 2, understanding third person aiming. With most of you coming from games like Overwatch or Apex Legends, you probably have some experience with first person shooters. But third person acts a bit differently. Instead of every bullet coming out of the center of your screen like they do in first person shooters, they come directly out of your weapon and then create a straight path towards your crosshair. And if you don't play much third person shooters, you probably think that this is just not a really big deal, but it completely changes how you should be aiming. So if you're close up to your enemy and you aim to the left of them, of course you're going to be missing your shot. Then you might be surprised that if you aim to the right of them, even though your crosshair is on empty space, it will still hit them. And again, this is because the bullets are coming out of your weapon and then trying to create a path to your crosshair, but if you're close up, the enemy kind of gets in the way of that. So yeah, in close range fights, you should be aiming slightly to the right of your target if you want to hit more shots. But you also have to keep this in mind when playing close to cover, because if you're trying to aim to the right of the cover, even if your crosshair is aimed at the enemy, but you're too close to that cover, you'll just end up shooting the wall. That's all good, but you need to follow tip 3. Create the perfect crosshair for you. So what you want to do is open up your settings, then go to either your keyboard or controller settings, depending on the input you use. Then under the HUD options, you have your crosshair option. Now this is sort of personal preference, but I think I have a really good crosshair for you to try out. So if you want crosshair like mine, you want to set your reticle type to crosshairs, turn off reticle animation, then you want your outline width to 50%. But you can change around this setting if you want, and it really helps make the crosshair stand out against the background. I have 100% outline opacity. Make sure there is 0 blur no matter what crosshair you're using, because I don't know why you would ever want a blur on your crosshair. I have the center gap set to 8, but then I have the crosshair length set to 4. Now for the color, if you want a vibrant cyan like mine, then set the red to 0 and then bump up the green and blue to the max. But if you're too lazy to copy all of that, don't worry. You can simply click this import save icon and then copy this code to get my exact crosshair. And also put the code in the description if you want to copy and paste it. So the perfect crosshair makes a big difference, but don't forget about tip 4. Wait for the perfect shot before firing. Specifically with single fire weapons like Black Widow sniper, what you need to be doing is learn the common enemy movement pattern. This definitely takes a while to get really good at, but eventually you're going to start picking up on exactly how players tend to move. Because if you think about it, a lot of aiming is just predicting the enemy's movement, but then the other part is recognizing when you're going to have an easy shot. Like every time someone jumps, they're stuck in that same jump path until they hit the ground, so it makes for some predictable movement that you can take advantage of. Or when you're playing against a Black Widow, you know their movement speed is super slow when aiming down sights, making her an easy target. But if you still find yourself choking these easy shots, follow tip 5. Lower your sensitivity. Using a relatively slow sensitivity, whether you're on controller or on mouse and keyboard, will almost always improve your aim. You may have instantly thought of some streamer or content creator that plays on an insanely high sensitivity and still hits all their shots. Well, to be honest, the truth is that a lot of creators that use a high sensitivity do it because it makes their gameplay look more impressive, which in turn brings them more viewers. But in reality, most pro players, at least the ones that aren't concerned about a viewership or a following, have a very slow sensitivity for better accuracy. Of course, it's all relative and you don't want to make it so slow that you can't keep up with the enemy's movements. But at the end of the day, if you want precise and consistent aim, then a lower sensitivity is the way to go as long as you follow tip 6. Get in the habit of aiming slightly in front of your enemy. With a few exceptions, almost every weapon and ability in Marvel Rivals is a projectile with travel time before it reaches your target. So if you want perfect aim, having your crosshair directly over your enemy for every shot, unless they are standing still, will only lead you to missing. So you need to be aiming where you think the enemy is going to be once your projectile reaches them. For every weapon and hero in the game, this is going to be slightly different and will take a little bit of time to get used to, but it's 100% worth keeping in the back of your mind whenever you're trying to improve your aim. Then you also need to keep tip 7 in in mind. Slow down and line up your shots. Or in other words, take your time and don't rush your shot. I used to fall victim to this all the time. I would see an enemy and then blow all my ammo before I ever really properly line up my aim. But once I started slowing down and really focusing in on my aim, my accuracy quickly improved. So yeah, if you're missing all your shots, just take a second, slow down, take a deep breath, and lock in. When you find that that doesn't work, I recommend tip 8. Change your reticle color or your enemy outline color to lock in. After playing day after day for hours at a time, you tend to start autopiloting. And with this autopiloting, your aim gets worse, and I like to think of it as lazy aim, as there's no real thought behind it. I find that when this starts happening, simply making a small visual change, such as my reticle color or the enemy team color, really helps me focus in on my aim. The color itself doesn't matter all that much, it's simply the act of changing it up that makes the big difference. But autopiloting or not, it won't matter if you aren't following tip 9. Hold your mouse or controller with a light grip. When you use a death grip, your aim is very stiff and you'll have trouble tracking enemy movement smoothly. But then if you have a lighter grip, your aim is more fluid and just better overall. This is also going to help prevent injuries like carpal tunnel, which nobody wants. But this is easier said than done. I find that the majority of the time when players death grip their mouse or controller, it's because they are in a difficult situation and are struggling to keep up. It's a natural tendency and it's more of a mental struggle than a physical one. To overcome this, it simply takes practice and experience in those difficult aiming situations, so you don't naturally just start death gripping that mouse, death gripping that controller. So I recommend jumping into a quick play match and consciously thinking about keeping a light grip the entire time, and hopefully this makes you a more consistent aimer. But please don't forget about tip 10. Use movement to help you aim. Yeah, the right thumbstick or the mouse is only half of aiming. The other half is your movement. So if the enemy is slightly to the right of your crosshair, instead of turning to line up your shot, try to take a couple steps to the right to line it up. And of course, it's the same thing in reverse if they're to the left of your crosshair. Then if a player is moving horizontally, simply following them with your own movement makes tracking them much easier. Then we have tip 11. You might hate to hear it, but take breaks to avoid fatigue. Naturally, the longer you play, the more tired you're going to be getting. And the more tired you are, the worse your aim is going to be. Because of this, you should try taking breaks every few games so you don't build up too much fatigue. This is especially important in Marvel Rivals because unless you're like the top 0.01%, the queue times are really quick. And it gives you very little time to rest in between matches. So taking breaks will certainly keep your aim from getting worse. But you probably want more actionable advice on how to improve your aim, which is why you need to follow tip 12. Try out these aim training drills in the firing range. Alright, so you spawn in here. What you want to do is walk out here, go to the right, and then you should see this little doorway over here. And down here is your little practice training grounds area. So what you want to do is go to parameters. This lets you change up what goes on here. So first, you like to select your hero. Really, you can do whatever hero you want, but I recommend doing either Iron Fist or Spider-Man, as they're very like thin heroes and they jump around a lot. Distance, usually I set it to random generation. I like to do either short range or mid range depending on what hero I'm practicing, but usually short range. Then static/dynamic movement, turn that on. Movement action, make sure that's on random. Movement speed, you can start off on normal. I recommend starting off on normal, and then as you get better and better, you can move it up to quick and then super fast. But when you're first starting out, you don't really know where you're at, just start on normal. Timer, off on, doesn't really matter. It just times you, so after 60 seconds it'll stop, like it'll despawn all the heroes, you have to restart it. So if you're trying to like track how long you're playing, it's a good option, but I usually just turn it off. Music, I also like to turn that off, and then click apply. And then now if you go over to control switch, start that up, gives you a little 5-second timer, and then you should see your enemies spawn. Just like that. Just shoot them, try to have the best aim possible. And also try to use all of the tips I mentioned earlier in this video. So use your movement to help you aim. Don't just stand still. And try to have a very light grip on your mouse. You're trying to incorporate all the tips you learned today into your training. So this is one thing you could do. Stand right here, just shoot those guys, try to aim for the head. You can also hit this jump pad. And then you have high ground. It's going to be a lot different aiming down than it is aim straight ahead. So it's definitely worth practicing aiming from up here. And then after doing that for a while, I also like to go back to parameters and switch off of Iron Fist and go to Iron Man. So Iron Man flies, so it's just a little bit of different style of practice. Yeah, aim is really important, but there's so much more that goes on in Marvel Rivals, which is why you need to watch this video up on your screen now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.